Here's something that most founders worth $10 million don't have in common with those worth $100 million or more. Their motivation. Founders worth $50 million or more typically aren't motivated by financial security anymore. Surprise, surprise. And from that, you can deduce that fear, that financial insecurity, it goes away at $50 million. This is according to data collected from 127 verified, vetted millionaire founders from the Hampton community. On Moneywise, we typically get inside the finances of one person at a time. But in this episode, we're looking at trends. Like the differences in how people worth 100 million allocate their wealth versus people worth 1 or 5 or 10. Wait until we get to the crypto bit. Or how much cash these people are actually taking home and what they're spending every month. And in addition to the survey data that I'm referencing here, I'm also going to be referencing my experiences speaking with over 100 different millionaire founders making this podcast over the last year and a half. Yeah, you asked for more episodes from me, so here I am. Well, one person did. And then another person said this. But I'm here. So before I actually break down some of this data, I want to give you some more context of who gave us these numbers. And before, I want to let you know that this podcast was made by and for Hampton, which is a community of high net worth founders who talk about this kind of stuff together all the time in person and in more detail, and also online, but also in person. So if you're a founder doing at least 3 million ARR, you should check it out at joinhampton.com. For the Moneywise side, I can tell you that the average person I've spoken to is probably worth between 10 and 50 million. We've spoken to some billionaires, we've spoken to some single-digit people, but that's probably the overview. I can tell you on the Hampton survey side, those numbers are much more specific because they did a better job keeping track of that than I did. The majority of those people were worth about 1 to 20 million, with 35% of those in the 1 to 5 range, and then 20% in both the 5 to 10 and 10 to 20 range, respectively. We also had about 9% of people in the under 1 million range, and then another 9% in the 20 to 50, and then 3% for both 50 to 100 and then 100 plus. My first thought was that this means that the people in the mid net worth range were overrepresented in this survey, but this is why I present the data and I don't collect it. That's actually a pretty good representation of the population of people who are worth this kind of money. According to the US Census 2022 numbers, this actually puts the majority of the respondents here in the 90th percentile of household net worth. The top 1%, according to an article from Forbes, has a median net worth of about 12 million. And that's according to data from the US Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finance, Yahoo Finance, and us, apparently. I'm assuming it's a different Moneywise. Regardless, the relevant information here is that every single person that I've spoken to, or that is referenced in this survey, has made their own wealth. They're founders. So this is going to be a bit different from maybe like a different category of 1% people. So let's analyze. At the start, I mentioned that one of the biggest differences between people worth the lower end of the spectrum and the higher end, which is, again, over 100 million, is the motivation. And I think at a glance, that data is already really fascinating. But what's more interesting to me is the story it tells. For motivators, the survey gave 6 options. I will list them. Financial security and freedom, achievement or challenge, general wealth building, impact, lifestyle, and retirement. What's really cool about the overview of the responses is that you can kind of make out a timeline of when goals actually are met and when they change on average. But there's also another argument you can make, which is that the goal is actually more directly related to the success. So somebody worth 100 million or more might have the goal of achievement and challenge, and perhaps that's why they are worth 100 million or more as opposed to somebody worth less. I would say, based on the conversations that I've had with everybody, that story of the evolution is pretty much always there. So I would say that that's more accurate, and those milestones are pretty accurate. But there are people who break the rule, and Bryan Johnson is one of them.
So earn the respect of people who are years in advance. So looking back at what your life and be like, he did great. Now, was the game like, so you started Braintree. Was the game or the mission, I'm going to make Braintree a huge success and I'm going to get incredibly wealthy. I'm going to use my wealth to do something interesting. Or was it like, I'm going to change payments or something like that?
No, it was entirely, I'm going to make money and then change the course of humanity. Because like specifically, I've read a lot of history, and what you learn is that the greatest contributions were rarely really appreciated in their time. Like most of the time, they bump up against the status quo, they get the predictable hate, And then it takes a couple decades or centuries for us to sort this out and be like, you know what, they were actually right. And so a really high level contribution isn't fully appreciated until at least some time point in the future. And that's why I almost don't care, and I don't want to care about what anyone thinks about me in this given moment.
But why do you care what they think about you in 2000 or in the 25th century? Because it's also like you're gone for hundreds of years. Who cares?
That's the standard of excellence. Is that if you're revered a few hundred years from now, you in your time and place did the most epic thing imaginable. So to me, it's like that's like the ultimate manifestation. So even though I'm not present to appreciate that, I still acknowledge that as the most epic thing I could strive for as an intelligent being.
Bryan Johnson is a bit of an exceptional person, so I would say he's a bit of an exception. But operating on the logic that this is showing milestones, there are some pretty interesting things here. By looking at the data, you can immediately see that the people at the bottom end of the spectrum are overwhelmingly motivated by financial security and generational wealth. But at 50 million, that just disappears. And if you're new to the show, we have what we've been calling a fuck you number, which is basically the number at which you don't have to work anymore. You've met financial freedom. Like that's you can do whatever you want. You have the means to do it. And I think we've talked to a lot of people. We've had like a lot of different answers, and people have said things, and we've kind of just like never really given an answer, but given a bunch of ideas so you can make up your own mind. But this is really interesting because it almost like provides an actual number, and it seems, based on this, like that number is 50 million. Something else that disappears at the 50 million mark is the motivator for lifestyle. And I think there's two things there. One is maybe you become accustomed to it, so it's not really, like, you're not leveling up the same way anymore. But also that 1 to 5 is usually when people get that first, burst of money and they start spending on things that they think they want and then later learn that they didn't want. That is something that most of the people that I've spoken to have gone through. In analyzing this data, I was also quite interested in the typical founder story, which is that you build, you spend all this time doing that, and then you get the payoff. Maybe you leave the company or just have like a big exit and step back a lot. And then you go through this period of loss and like you have a lack of purpose. But by looking at this data, I think what's actually really cool is that it tells a bit of an optimistic story. I'm going to equate purpose to motivation here. I don't think they're the exact same thing, but I do think that they're close enough, so I'm just going to go with this. Basically, your purpose as a founder doesn't go away, it just changes. Through your life cycle as a founder, you're driven by the things that make sense to you at the time. But then there are points when you hit those milestones and things change, whether you realize it or not. I think that that's something that shocks people a bit. You keep searching for this thing, this motivator, because it feels familiar. It's what you know. And you're just going to continuously be disappointed because it's not there anymore. And you're going to feel empty. It's kind of like if you go back to a playground at a park or something, and you try to play on the playground and have the same kind of fun and experience that you had as a kid. It's not going to feel the same. You can remember that feeling, but it's not going to feel the same because you're not a kid anymore. The people who continue to be successful are the people who keep moving forward. They're not looking backward. They're looking toward the thing that's going to motivate them based on where they are in life right now. You can still build a business or your wealth and feel satisfaction. It's just that satisfaction is going to come from a different place. To go back to my playground metaphor, you can still get a lot of joy and fulfillment out of going to a playground, but maybe you're watching your kid instead and they're having the time of their life and you're just like loving that, not trying to squeeze into a tubed slide and hoping that a little kid hasn't taken a little leak halfway down. Let's talk about money management because there are a few massive differences between the people at the bottom end of the spectrum and the people at the top. The first being crypto versus bonds. They have a bit of a reverse correlation thing going on here, if I'm using that term correctly. The higher your net worth, the lower percentage of crypto that you have in your portfolio. And when you get to the very top, you don't have any, according to these numbers. Bonds, on the other hand, show the opposite trend. And when it comes to alternative investments, bonds, the percentage that people who are worth 100 million or over allocate to bonds is higher than any other allocation across the board of any bracket. That's 15% on average. People worth 100 million or more have in bonds their entire portfolio. That's pretty big, I think. And notably, people over 100 million also don't seem to have any angel investments, though they do on average have about 3% in VC. And something else that differs at the top end of the spectrum is real estate. The ultra wealthy are far more invested in real estate, with about 24% on average of their portfolio allocated to real estate, whereas the 1 to 5 million range, that's 5% on average. And what's more interesting is that even the people in the 50 to 100 million range, they're not even close to that. The jump between that category and the people over 100 million is 20 points. The 100 million plus group is actually the only group that has a double-digit percentage of their net worth invested in real estate. Alex Paykoff is one of those people. He's from a family worth billions. And this is what he said about real estate.
I have a fair amount of debates with people on this stuff, and it's okay. They have their perspective. So it's all in real estate. And if you go back in time in North America, the majority of the people that have made wealth, okay, people that used to own like football teams, basketball teams, it was real estate. Commercial real estate, residential. Mine's all residential real estate. The checks keep on coming in.
Okay, I want to move on to the actual cash flow and spending. So let's just wrap up this portfolio section with a bit of a rapid fire without any commentary from me. First, most of the groups have between 20 and 40% of their net worth tied up in their business, with the exception of the people worth between 50 to 100 and 100 plus, who have about 70% tied up in their business. Curious how that's going to play out with the cash flow and spending. Second, the lower end of the spectrum keeps more cash, percentage-wise. Third, the lower end of the spectrum also has more of their portfolio in public stocks. And it doesn't do the thing where it goes down based on your net worth. It actually dips in the 20 to 50 group, who have about 8%. And then it goes back up. People worth 50 to 100 or 100 plus kind of end up being double that. So we get people who are in the lower end have almost a quarter of their net worth in public stocks, dips down, and then we get a higher percentage back in the 50 to 100 plus. That was a very efficient way of describing that. Fourth, there is no fourth. Net worth is a funny number. A bigger one doesn't necessarily mean more spending cash. Illiquid investments fluctuate a lot, and we've actually had some people on the show who have given their net worth in ranges of tens of millions of dollars because it, quote, depends on the market. A funny one of that actually was Chris Bakke, who he told us that his net worth was about 25 million, but it could be 50 if you counted Twitter stock. What is hard real money is cash flow. And we've actually talked to some people on the show who have optimized everything around cash flow, and they don't even care about net worth. So let's look at the take-home numbers. What are founders paying themselves? Maybe surprising, maybe not. The higher your net worth, the more money you take home. But what is interesting is that there actually isn't a big increase in the take-home until after 50 million. From 1 to 50 million, the average take-home inches up through the six figures. And then it's 20 to 50 million where you hit the first $1 million take-home average. But just that, it's just $1 million. And when you compare that to 2023 numbers, that group was taking home on average $750K. So quite an interesting increase. Then we get to the 50 to 100 million group, who are roughly taking home $1.9 million a year. And the 100 million plus crowd, that's where we get to $6.8 million on average take home in cash every year. But here's something even more interesting, and you may or may not have noticed it. The group in the 100 million plus range, they actually increased the average take home from 2023 to 2024 by 62%. But before we deduce that they all are just paying themselves a lot more, it's also important to remember that this is the smallest sample size in the survey group, so a couple big swings can change a lot pretty drastically. And remember when I said this? Curious how that's going to play out with the cash flow and spending. Yes, you may have, as it was only a few minutes ago when I was talking about how much of their net worth was tied up in their own company's valuation. We're here now. If I was just looking at the numbers from 2023, I possibly would come to the conclusion that a couple extra tens on your net worth doesn't really change your finances as much as you would think. But that's because in 2023, the group in the 10 to 20 million camp were taking home on average $850K, and the group in the 20 to 50 were taking home $750K. Modest by comparison. But I guess in 2024, something happened because the 10 to 20 group dropped to about $500K, and the 20 to 50, they rose to $1 million. So now they're 50% different. Good math. It was curious after all. But I also mentioned monthly spend. So let's talk about that. What's really cool about these numbers is that they are also compared to the 2023 ones. And because of that, we get to see a trend. So this is breaking news, but life is more expensive. On average, every single group is spending more money every month, with the exception of the 20 to 50, who are spending 9% less. So it's better for them. So let's go through it. In the 1 to 5 million range and also the 5 to 10 million range, they are averaging a monthly burn of about $15,000. Then we jump about 10K for both the 10 to 20 million group and the 20 to 50 million group, who are spending about $25,000 every month. The $50 to $100 million group, we jump a modest $5,000 a month. And then for the 100 million plus, remove the word modest, we double that. It is $60,000 a month on average that they are spending. These are obviously just numbers, and it doesn't really paint a picture of what they're spending on, where they're living, the families that they have, or the dependents that they need to pay for. So all of those kinds of things, they range. So we can look at numbers and say averages, but if you want to hear individual people's stories, then you should check out just the other interview episodes of Moneywise, because in those episodes, we break down single people's expenses, and that's quite fascinating, actually. Speaking of those people, a lot of them were motivated by financial independence. A few of them were even in the Fat Fire movement, which stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. It's a FIRE acronym. It's FIRE. So for the founders in the building stage who are working hard and grinding, the question is often, is it worth it? And also, is there going to be a time when I can just put my feet up and enjoy what I've built? The answer to the latter question is actually kind of easy. It's yes, according to this data. The data shows that the more you are worth, the fewer hours you work every week. But the more complicated answer to the question, is it worth it, is it depends. Money can give you the ability to buy your time back. It's great for that. But it doesn't mean that it's going to make you happy. It doesn't have the ability to do that. And that's something that I came to the conclusion of in a previous essay video about can money make you happy, which was also based on all the conversations that we've had. And yeah, the answer was no. If you want more of an answer than just no, you can check that video out after this one. The point is, working less doesn't actually mean you're going to be happier, the same way that working more doesn't mean you're going to be more successful. The things aren't exactly correlated. What this graph might also be showing, as the net worth is decently tied to age, is just that as you get older, you learn to slow down. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. But it doesn't need to mean that you had to have the money before you could do that. In fact, some of the happiest people that I've spoken to in the course of making this podcast are people who have figured that out early and made the intention to scale back when they were still young. They've purposely built a better work-life balance, or they don't actually have the goal to reach those big numbers at all. One episode that comes to mind immediately is the fan favorite, Laura Roeder. And if you want to listen to that one, you can click here. Also, there's a lot more that I would love to analyze from this report and compare to the stories that we've heard on Moneywise, but I just can't. I don't have the time for it all. If you want to just read the report and not hear my analysis anyway, you can click the link in the show notes.